Here is the entire obituary of a man who walked with Jesus. Acts chapter 12, verse 2. Herod had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. That's it. That's the whole thing. Count how long that took you. 4 seconds, maybe 5. A man leaves his father in a boat, walks away from a business, follows an itinerant preacher around Galilee, watches him die, says he watched him come back, and when the account of his death finally arrives, it's 1 sentence long, and it's over before you've settled into it. No last words, no crowd, no speech from the scaffold. Now, you've seen the list. Everybody's seen the list. Peter crucified upside down. Andrew on the X-shaped cross. Bartholomew flayed alive. Thomas run through with a spear in India. Simon the Zealot sawn in half. Here's what I didn't know until this year. That sentence in Acts 12 isn't the first of 12. It's one of 2. And the silence around the other 10 has a shape. We're coming back to that, and it's the reason I made this. You might think this is trivia. It isn't, and here's why. That list gets used. It gets used as evidence. You've heard the argument. Maybe you've made it. I have. 11 men died horribly rather than take it back, and people don't die for something they know is a lie. So it must be true. That's a real argument, doing real work, in real conversations. People stake things on it. So it's worth knowing where the list actually comes from. And before we touch it, I want to say something about why we want it. We want the scoreboard because we want proof. If 11 men were tortured to death and not one of them cracked, that settles something. It turns belief into a conclusion instead of a risk. It means you're not out on a limb, you're just reading the evidence correctly. That's a very comfortable place to stand. If you've ever wanted the evidence to be just slightly more airtight than it actually is, so that faith would cost you a little less to hold on to that. I want that too. I want it right now. This is about what the text does instead. The New Testament records the deaths of exactly 2 of the 12. One of them is the traitor. The other gets a single sentence. Everything else you've ever heard about how these men died reaches us by a completely different road. And the other half of that, right now, because if I hide it, you should stop trusting me. That other road isn't lies. Tradition isn't fabrication. Some of it is early, some of it is serious. And there's at least one of these men whose tradition I wouldn't bet against. But it's a different kind of thing than a verse, and nobody ever tells you which one you're holding. So here's the tool. It'll let you check me instead of trusting me. There's one word doing all the work in every retelling of this list, including the good ones, including the honest ones. Tradition. It arrives in a soft voice at the end of each section. Tradition holds. Tradition says. Tradition suggests. And nobody hears it because by then you're already picturing the man on the cross. So every time a death arrives from here on, we ask the one question the retellings never ask out loud. Who says so? And when? Start with the one that's actually in the book. James, son of Zebedee, brother of John, one of the inner 3. Acts 12, around the year 44. Herod Agrippa has him killed with a sword. That's the record. That's all of it. The scholar Henry Alford suggested he was probably beheaded. And notice what just happened. Even that detail isn't from the verse. It's a named man making a reasonable inference centuries later. And it's already better sourced than most of what's coming. Here's the line that stopped me. The standard summary of James says this. He was the second of the apostles to die after Judas Iscariot and the first to be martyred. The first to be martyred. Read that again because it's doing 2 things at once. It concedes there were others. Of course there were others. And it quietly concedes that the book doesn't tell us about a single one of them. Which brings us to the other one, the uncomfortable one. Judas. Matthew 27 says he threw the money into the temple, went away, and hanged himself. Acts chapter 1 says he fell headlong and burst open, and that the field was called the field of blood. Those don't obviously match, and people have worked hard on it. The common harmonization is that both are true, and they're describing different moments. Matthew tells you what Judas did. Luke tells you the state of the body afterwards. the rope broke, or the branch did, and what was already a corpse fell and came apart on the rocks. That's a serious reading, held by serious people. It isn't a dodge. The objection is just as serious. Acts says he fell headlong, which is a strange way to describe a body dropping off a rope. And the two accounts also differ about who actually bought the field. I'm not going to settle that for you. I've read both sides, and I don't think I'm qualified to hand you a verdict. But look at what just happened, because it matters more than the answer does. The two deaths the Bible actually records are recorded with friction. They're not tidy. One is a single sentence. The other is told twice, in two versions people have argued about for centuries. That's what a real record looks like. Hold that. It matters at the end. Now, Peter. And here I have to be careful, because if I'm sloppy, you should stop watching. No verse in the New Testament tells you how Peter died. But look at the dates. The dates are the whole point. Clement of Rome mentions Peter's death in the early 2nd century. That's close. That's within touching distance of living memory. It's vague. He doesn't give you the scene, but as evidence that Peter died the way the church remembered, that's serious. I'm not going to wave it away. Origen, writing in the 2nd to 3rd century, quoted later by Eusebius, is the one who gives you the detail. Crucified, upside down, under Nero, around the year 64. And the apocryphal Acts of Peter is where it gets painted in. So look at what's stacked inside that one famous sentence. The fact is early, the detail is later. Two completely different confidences, wearing one costume. This is the strongest tradition on the whole board, and I want to say that plainly rather than bury it. If you told me Peter was crucified in Rome under Nero, I wouldn't argue with you. But here's what gets me about Peter. Look at how much the New Testament does tell you about him. It tells you the exact Greek word for the fire he was standing at on the worst night of his life, when he said 3 times that he didn't know the man. Anthrachia. Say it, anthrachia. A charcoal fire, a heap of burning coals. That word appears exactly twice in the entire New Testament, both times in John. Once in the courtyard, where he warms his hands and denies him, and once on a beach, where there's another charcoal fire, and Jesus asks him 3 times whether he loves him. John had other words for fire. He used the rare one twice. Think about that for a second. The text will spend a rare Greek word, will build an echo across 3 chapters to make absolutely sure you feel the shape of Peter's worst night and what came after it. And then it won't tell you how he died. That's not carelessness. That's a priority. Now watch how fast this goes once you know the shape. Andrew, the X-shaped cross. It's on the flag of Scotland. That diagonal cross is Andrew's, and it's been flying over a country for centuries. Source, the Acts of Andrew. Apocryphal, emerged decades to centuries later, contains supernatural claims. Philip, crucified upside down, or stoned, or beheaded, or he died of natural causes. 4 options. One of them is nothing happened to him. Bartholomew, flayed alive, then beheaded. It's the image in every painting of him. Sources, the Golden Legend and Fox's Book of Martyrs, a 13th century compilation and a 16th century martyrology, and even they don't agree. Other versions have him crucified or drowned. And John is the one that makes me laugh, quietly. Tradition says John wasn't martyred at all. He died old, in Ephesus, in his bed. He's the exception. He's the one who got away. So naturally, he has a torture scene. Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd or 3rd century, says the Romans boiled him in oil before they exiled him to Patmos. And he survived it. Obviously, he has to. He's got a book to write. The one apostle tradition says was not martyred is the one with a cauldron in his story. That should tell you something about what these accounts are for. Thomas is different, and honesty means saying so. The Acts of Thomas records that he was killed with a spear at Mylapore in India in the year 72. And here's the striking thing. No other tradition exists. Everywhere else on this list, the sources are shouting over each other. Here, there's one story. It's never had a rival. Nobody ever put forward a competing version. That isn't proof. The Acts of Thomas is a late text, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But a single stable story is a different shape of evidence than a field of guesses. And the Martyrdom Christians of Kerala have held that story as their own founding history for a very long time. That's not mine to adjudicate. Matthew is where the scoreboard loses one of its own entries. The versions you'll hear: burned, or stoned, or stabbed, or beheaded. Fox says a halberd in Ethiopia in the year 60. And then there's Clement of Alexandria, who quotes a man named Heracleon saying that Matthew died a natural death. One of the earliest voices in the whole chain says he wasn't martyred at all. And notice what most retellings do with Matthew. They'll tell you he preached in Persia and Ethiopia, and then they move on to the next man without ever telling you how he died. Not because they're hiding something, because there's no answer to give. Which brings us to Simon the Zealot. Simon has 7 deaths. I'm going to read them. 1. Martyred in Persia or Armenia with Jude in the year 65. That's the most widespread version. It comes from the Golden Legend, compiled by Jacobus de Voragine in the 13th century. 2. Sawn in half at Swanir in Persia. That comes from Justus Lipsius. 3. Martyred at Wariosphora in Caucasian Iberia, according to Moses of Corine. 4. Died in Abkhazia in Georgia on an Eastern tradition. 5. Crucified in Samaria, according to Ethiopian Christians. 6. Crucified in Roman Britain on the 10th of May in the year 61 by a Roman official named Cottus Decianus at Caister. 7. Died peacefully at Edessa. Sit with the range of that. These traditions can't agree on the continent: Persia, Georgia, Samaria, Britain. One of them hands you a precise day of the month and the name of the man who did it. Another says nobody did anything to him at all, and he died of old age in Edessa. And the sawing, the detail everyone repeats, the one in every graphic on the internet. Justus Lipsius died in 1606. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. It's what every video here does. One detail, followed all the way down to wherever it actually goes. And while we're standing on Simon, there's something else, and I'm not happy about it. You know the beat. Every video about the 12 has it, and it's genuinely beautiful. Matthew was a tax collector. He worked for Rome. He made his living off the occupation. And Simon was a zealot, a man from a movement that wanted Rome dead, whose most extreme wing carried knives. Put those two in the same group of 12. Tell them to love each other. The group itself is a miracle of reconciliation. I love that beat. I've believed that beat for years. And it might not be true. John P. Meyer argues that zealot here is a mistranslation, that in the context of the Gospels, the word means zealous or religious, and that the zealot movement, as an organized political party, apparently didn't exist until 30 or 40 years after these events. If Meyer's right, the beat dissolves. There was no party for Simon to have belonged to yet. Now, Brandon and Hengel disagree with Meyer. Robert Eisenman goes the other way entirely and argues the zealot element was deliberately written out of the early Christian sources. And Jerome, and later Bede, thought the word wasn't political at all. They read it as Canaanian, meaning Simon came from Cana, a town. So the man might have been a revolutionary, or he might just have been enthusiastic, or he might have been from Cana. Nobody knows. I wish I could hand you the beautiful version. I can't. And here's the one nobody mentions at all. The 4 lists of the 12 don't match each other. Matthew and Mark give you Thaddeus, right there in the list, between James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon. Luke doesn't. Neither does Acts. In that exact slot, they have a man called Judas, son of James. And the 2 names never appear in the same book. Not once. Now, the standard answer is that it's one man with 2 names, that he used the second one to avoid being confused with the other Judas for reasons you can probably work out. John MacArthur takes Judas as the birth name and Thaddeus as the nickname, and that answer is probably right. I think it's right. But sit with what it means. The earliest evidence we have already shows the sources differing about who the 12 actually were. Before we get anywhere near how they died, we're already harmonizing who they were. So where does the confident list come from? Partly from a book that isn't by the man whose name is on it. There's a text called On the 12 Apostles of Christ. It's attributed to Hippolytus. It's one of the standard sources for exactly the kind of tidy, one-line per apostle martyrdom entry that circulates today. It's pseudepigrapha. It was discovered in the 19th century. It isn't his. That's a fact about a document. It isn't an accusation against anybody, and I'm not making one. But it does explain how a list manages to be so confident and so contradictory at the same time. So line it up. Acts, year 44. In the book. Clement of Rome, early 2nd century. Origen, 2nd to 3rd. The Acts of Andrew, the Acts of Philip, the Acts of Thomas. Apocryphal, later. Hippolytus, who isn't Hippolytus. The Golden Legend, 13th century. Fox, 16th. Justus Lipsius, 1606. And a national flag with an X on it. Now look at that column, and something jumps out. The further you get from the event, the more the details know. So why doesn't the book tell us? Go to the end of Acts. This is the New Testament's only history book, the one that would have to carry these deaths if anything did. It's the book that gave us the one sentence about James. Chapter 28. Paul's in Rome, under house arrest, 2 years. Receiving everyone who comes to him, preaching, the text says, boldly and without hindrance. And that's the end. The book stops, with its main character alive. Now, why it stops there is genuinely debated. Maybe Luke simply finished writing before Paul died, which is the simplest answer and probably the best one. Maybe Theophilus already knew how it came out. Maybe the whole thing is a legal brief, background for a Roman court. Maybe there was going to be a 3rd volume that never came. Nobody's sure. But whichever one is right, the fact just sits there. The book ends. And nobody dies in the last scene. One more, and then I'll stop, because this one sharpens the whole thing. The best attested apostolic death we have doesn't belong to any of the 12. Paul, beheaded under Nero before the year 68. Clement of Rome records it in the early 2nd century. The Acts of Paul backs it up. Tertullian, around the year 200, backs it up again. That's a real chain. That's about as good as ancient evidence gets for a thing like this. And it's still not in the New Testament. The book that contains 13 of his letters does not tell you how he died. Sit with that. The single best documented apostolic death in the entire tradition belongs to the man whose writing takes up more of the New Testament than anybody else's. And the New Testament doesn't mention it. So come back to the thing I asked you to hold at the start. We wanted the scoreboard because we wanted proof. 11 horrible deaths. 11 men who wouldn't take it back. That would settle it. And I understand the wanting completely because I've done it. I've reached for that list in an argument. It felt like handing someone something solid. And the documents won't give us that. Not because the evidence got lost, because they weren't built for it. They were built to tell you what he said, and what happened to him, and what he asked a fisherman 3 times on a beach next to a fire the writer went out of his way to make you remember. The people who wrote this down were not assembling exhibits for an argument you'd be having 2,000 years later. They were telling you about him. Here's the picture I can't get out of my head. Every family has 2 archives. There's a box of photographs somewhere. Actual photographs, the kind with a white border and somebody's handwriting on the back with a date on it. And here's the thing about that box. It's boring. It's a real face on a real afternoon, and nothing is happening. Nobody's telling a joke. Your grandmother is squinting. And then there's the story your uncle tells at every single wedding. You know the one. It has a punchline. It has a villain. It has a moment where everybody leans in because they know it's coming, because he's told it 40 times. And it has got better. Every year, it has got better. There's a detail in it now that wasn't in it when you were 9. Both of those are your family. Genuinely, both. Only one of them is evidence. And the strange part, the part I can't get past, is which one you'd grab in a fire. Because the story is warmer. The story is the one that makes you feel like you knew him. The photograph is just true. And after enough years, nobody alive can tell you which parts of the story were ever in the box. Here's what stays with me. It's the one sentence. Herod had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. That's the entire earthly record of a man who left his father sitting in a boat and walked away to follow somebody. No last words, no crowd, no speech. And the same book, the same writers, will spend a rare Greek word and build an echo across 3 chapters to make sure that 2,000 years later you can still feel exactly what it was like for Peter to stand at a fire and lie about knowing him. They had the space, they had the skill, they obviously cared about the details. They gave James one line and moved on to a prayer meeting. I don't think that's neglect. I think it's a document that knows what it's for. So come back to where we started. I asked you to notice how fast that sentence was over. Here's why. It isn't the first of 12, it's one of 2. And the other one is the traitors. Told twice, in 2 versions nobody has ever fully reconciled. And around the other 10, there's nothing. Not a hedge, not a hint, not a promise of more to come. The silence isn't a hole where the evidence used to be. It's the shape of the thing. These documents were never a martyrology. That got built later, out of love and out of grief and out of people wanting it to be exactly as certain as we want it to be. By people who missed them. So here's the list, the real one. The death the book records in a single sentence. The death the book records twice and can't tidy. The death Clement of Rome knew about within living memory. The death that ended up on a national flag. The death that has 4 versions, one of which is nothing happened. The death one of the oldest voices in the chain says never happened at all. The death that took place in Persia or Armenia or Georgia or Samaria or Britain on the 10th of May. Or peacefully, in Edessa, of old age. The death a man in 1606 sawed in half. And 10 men the New Testament simply lets go. If that's what you want more of, subscribe. One detail, all the way down, wherever it actually goes. And here's where I'll leave you. The men in the paintings don't need to have died well for any of this to be true. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The book had every chance. It could have given us 11 death scenes. It would have been magnificent. We'd have quoted it forever. It gave us 1 sentence and a silence. And then it spent its rare words on a charcoal fire and 3 questions and a man who got to say yes after saying no. It didn't tell you how they died. It told you what they saw.